Welcome to Integrative You Radio, where we challenge everything conventional medicine forgot to tell you. I'm Dr. Nicole, joined by Dr. Nick, and this is the show for the black sheep families that look at life differently. We're not here to tell you what to do, we're here to open your eyes to new perspectives and new ways of thinking. Now, let's get into it.
Yeah. Feel that? The sound of possibility.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Integrative You Radio. I am Dr. Nick, and I am blessed today with Dr. Jess. We got into, I think, at least a dozen quick side tangents before this, and I had to stop him on every single one. I was like, "Whoa, wait! This is good shit. We're gonna talk about this later." So here we are. So really quick, Dr. Jess, introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself, your practice, and then we'll get in deep.
Thanks so much, Dr. Nick. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today and share some information with your audience. My name is Dr. Jess Armine. Okay, I've been in healthcare one form or another for 50 years. Starting in around 1975, I became an EMT in New York City and became one of the first paramedics there. That was interesting because that's when that TV show Emergency was on, and everybody in the world saying, "Why don't we have paramedics for pre-hospital emergency care?" So I did that, and simultaneously, I went to nursing school. I went to college for nursing and graduated with a BS in nursing in 1978. So my nursing career was partially in the Army, and obviously beyond that. And I did mostly emergency department nursing and critical care. I used to be head nurse of a coronary intensive care unit. I became interested in going beyond, please excuse me, going beyond the what I saw as limiting parameters of healthcare, and decided to become a doctor. And so I looked into medical school, but ultimately decided on chiropractic college. I went there and graduated in 1986, and started working traditionally as a chiropractor. I found that limiting. Because the diagnosis set was like, oh, that's easy,
Yep.
And I couldn't get into the hype involved in the politics, and I'm not that kind of person. I started getting interested in the broader complementary or integrative medicine concepts out there. Throughout that time, I started, learning different things, and unfortunately, one of my children developed schizophrenia. And being a good dad, I took him to the psychiatrist. Now, this very bright, intelligent boy who at 10 years of age read Dante's Inferno and understood it and explained it to me, which makes me believe he's really not from this planet, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
And he would tell you that at the time, I am an alien. I said, now you proved it to me. But the medicines that they gave him made him a non-entity. Literally, he was sitting on the couch doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also a religious person, so I was praying, but I got very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally said to our higher powers that this disease is messing with the wrong daddy. And I launched into learning a lot of different things about neurotransmitter balances, and just like anything else in the universe, people, when you have a true desire for something, spirit, whatever, will put that information in front of you. Courses, people who do it, that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what happened. So over time, I developed an expertise in genetics. I was in the very beginnings of the genetics craze. Okay, so I know all the guys who are doing it because I was part of it. And so I can read entire genetic profiles and tell you what they're about. In a concept called neuroendoimmunology, which is a relationship between the nervous system, the hormone system, and the immune system, and how they interact to balance your body. Okay, I got an interest and expertise in mitochondrial function, and a small area that most people don't consider, which is cell membrane integrity,
Mm-hmm.
which is, so you talk about leaky gut, leaky cells, leaky brain, which is, by the way, a shameless plug for my book on Amazon. Okay, but nevertheless, I started doing this kind of work, and I started attracting people who have had chronic illnesses that hadn't gotten success elsewhere. The more people like that I got, the more I started to notice a particular area that had never been truly considered, therefore not treated. And as we discussed, it's called a terrain, or what I used to call foundation.
Yep.
Okay. And the creation of what's now known as terrain treatment, or what I started with foundational treatment, I was one of the originators of it. And what that is paying attention to cellular function. Okay. Not exclusive of the downstream effect, which we call a diagnosis, right? But that was the thing not being treated. So when you had these people being ill, and whatever root causes were allegedly eradicated, assuming that they believe there was a root cause for lots of different things, the reason they weren't getting better was because the terrain was not being treated. If the cell's not functioning well,
And I don't think
remember cells,
maybe everybody
cells together.
might not understand what terrain means. So can you explain what the terrain actually means?
Absolutely. Think about the terrain of anything. Okay, so what is the terrain of your body? Well, it's your cellular function, because put cells together, you get tissues. Put tissues together, you get organs. Put organs together, you get a body. So if at the very basis of anything in your body is not working, the cell, for different reasons, okay, you're not going to be able to heal. So when you think about terrain in this sense, you think about cellular function, and very often, almost 99.9% of the time, it's gut function. Okay, why the gut is not working. Okay, remember that 80% of your immune system is with the gut.
Yep.
So if that's not working correctly, and we're not going to, not argue about concepts, your body's not. So that's kind of your terrain. It's not just the microbiome with probiotics, it's the entire function. So cellular function is the terrain. Okay, so and we use the word terrain because the concept is much easier to visualize.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's like you're going to plant a garden and you can put in organic vegetables and organic fruits, but if the soil's crap, it doesn't have any nutrients, the terrain can't actually grow healthy crops.
Exactly
so
true.
It doesn't
100%.
matter. It doesn't matter what you throw at it. The terrain, the foundation, as you mentioned, it's unable to actually support life.
And taking that example to another direction, if you start putting artificial stuff in there, or put organophosphates like Roundup to kill the things around it, that gets absorbed, and then the fruit becomes, I wouldn't say less functional, but not as healthy, very not as healthy. So,
well, it creates a different function. It actually genetically modifies it.
It can genetically modify it, and things like organophosphates and Roundup actually get into the plant and get into the soil and get into the water. And if you want to know why Roundup, which is an organophosphate, works so quickly, it stops the mitochondrial function in the plant. So you've seen it happen in hours. So what do you think it's doing to you? I mean, mitochondria. You may have 30 trillion cells with 1,000 to 100,000 mitochondria per cell. You do the math, okay? But it's going to degrade the overall function. Add that to other things that are thrown at us.
And listeners, really quick, think of back in your school age. Your mitochondria is your powerhouse. What gives you all your power. So if your mitochondria is not functioning, you don't have power. If you don't have power,
the mitochondria,
carry on.
You can heal.
Yep.
But so for people who need to know a little bit about mitochondrial function, let me give you 30 seconds on it. I told you the enormity of how many are in there. Think of the function as not on or off. Think of it as percentage. Let's say normal is 95% energy output. Now you can heal. Now you can walk. Now you can do everything you want to do, and you feel good in the morning and you sleep well and so forth and so on. You get an acute problem like strep throat. That may drop to about 80%. You feel terrible. That resolves with antibiotics, whatever, and all of a sudden you're back up to the 95%. But when you start getting chronic illnesses, things that last more than 3 months, that percentage slowly drops with each thing that is added to it. So let's say it gets down to about 75%. Now you don't have the energy you used to have. Okay, you're still sitting up looking at me, but you'll sit there and say, I'm just getting old. Okay, now comes COVID and the vaccinations with something called the spike protein, which is the thing that injures you. And that directly affects the mitochondrial function, dropping it from that 75 to about 55. And long COVID is people who have not been able to resolve from that, not just the virus, but the dysfunctions that's happened from the virus. They have to detox from that. Mitochondrial output, you can live with 50% output. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to do your activities, you're going to have the same energy. And since it's so long term, you start assigning it to other things, or somebody's going to tell you it's in your head.
The body's very good at delegating, fortunately and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So when you talk about terrain therapy and how a lot of physicians and the foundation of medicine is focused on treating symptoms, what would you say is the biggest problem in healthcare today?
The biggest problem in healthcare today is twofold. Well, the main fold is sometimes you call it medical gaslighting. Okay, and essentially because all right, let me call a spade a spade. We've been the physicians have been conditioned over time by their training. They're not stupid and they care, but by their training, they were taught very constantly and that you have to depend on these tests to make your diagnosis for you, which is not true. Okay. In the old days, if you will, if you went to your family doctor and you were losing your hair and you're wearing a jumper or a sweater and it's 95 degrees out, or if you're in England, 37, 38 degrees out, something like that. Okay. And you're still cold and you're gaining weight for no reason, your doctor will look at you and say, you have hypothyroidism, low thyroid function, and start treating you, even if you had a normal test in your hand. Now, these days, they can't even treat it unless the test shows it. That doesn't mean that you're normal. These tests have reference ranges. They're not normal ranges, they're reference ranges. And those don't necessarily tell you you're healthy. I'll give you a cute example. You can test for dopamine levels, a neurotransmitter, and the range is 0 to 190. Does that mean 0 is good for you, having no dopamine? Okay. I'm serious. And
No,
the way
yeah,
they get these ranges, they do 100,000 tests and they do a bell curve. Okay.
well,
So
the
it
range
tells you,
and these range aren't on quote unquote people that are thriving.
right,
It's
exactly.
it's on sick people too, and it's just like it makes zero
Exactly.
sense.
It makes zero sense. But the biggest glitch in medicine, in my estimation, is a lack of taking a proper history. Okay. Because if you want to know what's wrong with someone, you need to do an in-depth history. This is why, again, in the pre-1970 areas, you had a family doctor, a GP, the typical doctor who knew you since you were a baby, knew your family, knew your history. We don't have that anymore. So if you learn to sit down, like my history's take an hour and a half. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that because I'm not under insurance and stuff like that. But if I do a history like that and get from the time they're inside their mom's belly all the way till now, I'm going to find out what's wrong.
Yep.
If I learn to listen, if I know, what questions to ask and what they mean. Today, the doctors are allowed 15 minutes a patient if they're lucky. That's not their fault. That's being the corporations pushing them to that. Okay, they're stuck. They're stuck.
Yep.
All right, and they're stuck in that thinking that if the tests are normal, then you don't have what it is that you think you have. So if you have all those symptoms of the hypothyroidism and you don't have a proper test that says that, then guess what? It's not that, or it's all in your head. Okay. So
Well,
when they get frustrated, they say it must be a psychiatric problem.
and I think it's
Okay.
twofold, or at least twofold, is the
Yeah, at least.
foundation is the quality of your life is dictated by the quality of the questions you ask. So
Exactly.
if a doctor doesn't have the time or doesn't take the time to ask those quality questions, they can't
Mm-hmm.
even actually run the proper test because they don't have a foundation to know what to
Exactly.
test. And then on that side of the medical system is they can't run a full panel. They're running 2
Oh
markers
my
out
God. Oh,
of 8 or 12.
I agreed.
And
Yeah.
that's you can't, without data, whether it's through a health questionnaire or actually
Mm-hmm.
the full data of labs, you can't make an intelligent decision.
You can't. And
And
remember
then
that. Oh, go ahead.
well, and then it's all in your head. And part of it might be, a mental distress and emotional.
Yes, if you're
That's the other part.
scared,
That's
all
the
the
other
time, you
part
don't
of
know what's
terrain
wrong.
that's the other part of terrain that people don't talk about. They talk about the physical
Mhm.
terrain. They don't, you
Right.
know, like we were talking. One of the tangents with the integrative aspect is, there's a lot of integrative buzziness out there, but there's really not many true integrative practitioners. So,
True. Absolutely true.
from your definition, you've been quote unquote practicing, and I call it practice because, like you said, you learn from being a nurse and there's limits. You learn from being
Yeah.
a chiropractor, there's limits, and it was our same journey as well as like
hmm
finally led you into true integrative medicine. So, through your perspective and your lens, what is actually true integrative medicine?
True integrative medicine would be a meshing or an agreement or a cooperation between traditional medicine and, let's call it, non-traditional medicine, alternative medicine, whatever you'd like to call it, because traditional medicine can't cure everything, nor can alternative medicine, but together we're going to be looking truly holistically at the body. When I say holistically, I don't mean I'm going to swing a dead chicken over your head or use crystals. What I mean is we have two different points of view. They're a bit on the opposite side, but they interact when it comes to symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I may look at something and say, well, this dysfunction or this genetic pathway says that they're not going to recycle glutathione, for instance. And I'll say, that might cause mitochondrial problems. But on the other end, they're having undiagnosed fatigue. And the medical doctor's done all the tests and just everything's sitting in the reference ranges. If we got together and were able to look at that particular case with a proper history, we could come up with a much better set of possibilities that are going to be more accurate.
Yep.
Okay? The reason I'm successful at what I do, but I'm not the first person I see. I'm usually a 10th or 12th. So if I listen and find out what happened, what didn't happen, what worked, what didn't work, and so forth and so on, it's kind of easier for me to figure out what's left over.
Yep.
Okay, what hasn't been treated, what hasn't been considered. So true integrative medicine would be our two professions meshing, or to have one person who is very well trained in both areas
Yep.
and knows the significance of things. Okay.
Well,
And never, ever, 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 ever says the words, that can't happen.
that's
That will
just
get you thrown out of my courses.
a balanced perspective.
Exactly.
You talk
Yeah.
about gathering data to make the best decision for the client
Right.
or
Exactly.
even yourself.
Mhm.
It's if you're only looking at through one lens, through traditional, or one lens through non-traditional, you're missing half of the information, half of the possibilities, which doesn't make any sense when you step back and you
Right.
think about it. So to be whole is to have the awareness of both sides.
Exactly.
And
And
when we do, magic can happen.
exactly. That's why people who come see me or people like me, you know, will get much better results because we look at it and say, that's not working. I wonder why. Or they say something, and instead of saying that can't happen, I sit there and go, I wonder why that happened. Let me go back. Let me re-examine this stuff. Sadly, the traditional medical practice doesn't lend itself to taking a long history. So you sit in the doctor's office, you fill out a history form, you go in and see the doctor. Nobody really reads that. Or they send a physician extender in. Now, if you're talking about a physician assistant, a nurse practitioner, it's usually a lot better. But a lot of times it's an assistant looking at it. Okay. And the only person who should take a history is the physician himself or herself because they have the training to understand what the possibilities are based on what that patient said and then ask the proper questions. And you sit there and go, okay, well, gee, if this all started when you were in fourth grade and your mental state got, you had ADD and then it got worse and now you've got agoraphobia and you're 45 years old and you've got so much anxiety you can't leave the house. Let me go back to there and see what happened. And then they tell you something like, gee, I lost my taste for meat. That just as a side comment, once you get them conversing. And you sit there and go, do you guys do a lot of camping? They're like, yeah, we always went camping. Well, there's a certain kind of Lyme disease that causes that particular symptom. Okay. Alpha-gal syndrome, it's called. All right, well, guess what? this poor person was suffering from neural Lyme, which urged him to create more dysfunction. Now he can't function. I started with the terrain therapy.
And nowadays, it's not even just from ticks. You know, you can get it from
No,
mosquitoes. You can get it from
absolutely
spiders. You can get it from anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. But the fact is that you go back and all of a sudden the possibility opens up. Then if you want, you can test for it and you find out it's there. Okay. You know, I had a young lady who was 8 years old and she had multiple hallucinations, olfactory, auditory, and visual. And they were going to put her on antipsychotics. Okay. 8 years old. That made me angry. You know, I did a good history and then did the testing. She had Lyme disease, anaplasma, candida, and HHV6, which is a herpes that gets in the brain. I treated those things. In about 6 weeks, she was fine. Now, that was a while ago. Now, she now graduated college. She graduated from graduate school with a degree in nutrition, and she's going to medical school next year. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, she's a beautiful lady. You know, every time they keep in contact with me, every time I get a card about what she's done, I start crying, you know, because what was going to happen then was she was going to be a disabled person because they didn't believe that there were root causes for that. Okay. Yep. And even if they treated that, they wouldn't have treated the terrain. But that's why, you know, a good history tells you what's going on. But only the physician level person should do that because they're not going to pick up that happened here. I wonder what could have happened.
It's the little things that nobody thinks important. That's what
the
you
most
pay
important.
For. Yep, 100%.
That's where the pearls are.
Yep. So my wife and I had a really big practice in Jersey about 10 years ago, and we did a questionnaire, and it was it was to our clients, what we sent it out to different communities, et cetera, and what they thought was the most important thing in their doctor. And we were actually not surprised, but surprised about the actual result. Trust. Trust was the number one thing that they wanted with their doctor.
Absolutely.
So when I say that, what comes to mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, trust is not accuracy in diagnosis. Trust is you've listened to me. Okay, you've listened to me and you've acknowledged that what I have is real. Okay, and then if you know how to talk to people and you've done your investigation and they can follow you along and you come up with, gee, I believe it's this because of this and this is how we're going to go about fixing it, and this is how and why. Not using technical language. I mean, I do my lectures all the time. I talk to people in cartoons and examples. You know, it's not important that they understand the nuances of something, not because I'm trying to hide it from them, and they're not going to be impressed that I can pronounce polysyllabic terms. Doesn't matter. What matters is if I can show you or tell you what's happening, and then intuitively you say that person's right. Okay, this sounds good. This feels good. Okay, well that's where trust comes in. And when someone has trust, they're going to allow themselves to heal.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody's nervous and scared, they don't know what's going on, and you're not giving them a good answer, or you've worked with them and things aren't working, you just sit shrugging your shoulders and say it must be in your head, as opposed to stepping back all the time and reevaluating. You know, and they see you doing the work. You know, they don't sit there and say, oh, he's stupid. No, they say, wow. Or if I bring something to a group that I'm in, saying, listen, I'm going to talk to my friends about this. They don't sit there and say, you must be dumb. They sit there and say, he cares enough to bring this to his friends to see what's going on. They don't get charged for that. It's just that, you know, I bring it to a think tank, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I get stuck, well, guess what? They'll sit there and say, okay, he's the guy we want to follow. And that's not, you could be an ego thing for somebody, but if it's not an ego thing, you sit there and say, okay, if they trust you a lot of times, they will simply calm and allow. Why is this true? And this is another 45 seconds. In 2013, Dr. Robert Navio, MD, PhD, wrote a paper on something called a cell danger response. What he did is scientifically quantify everything that injures a cell. And they're divided into toxins, as you might expect, okay? Microbes, viruses, parasites, and so forth, And on a scientific basis, all the psychological, emotional, and spiritual traumas that you experience will injure the cell in equal measure as microbes and toxins.
Yep.
Hey, quick pause before we dive back in. If what we're talking about today is hitting home, if you've been told your labs are normal, but you know something's off, we built something for you. It's called the Health Decode. It's a deep dive assessment, not a quiz, not a symptom checker. It's the intake I wish every doctor started with. We look at what conventional medicine was never trained to find: stress patterns, biological conflicts, the stuff hiding behind the normal blood work. You'll get a personalized wellness report back from our team. And here's the thing: if it clicks, if you read it and think, finally, someone actually gets it, that $47 becomes a credit toward our foundation program. So you're not spending twice just taking the first step. No pressure, no countdown timer. Just if you're tired of being told you're fine when you know you're not, head over to Integrative.health and check out the Health Decode. Links in the show notes. All right, let's get back into it.
Yep.
Okay. So believe it or not, you can have just a PTSD. You can have be a victim of a rape or long-term abuse over time. That's going to injure your cells just as much as if you get chronic Lyme disease. If you get, if you get exposed to
Well, I
to a
mean,
toxin,
relationship
it may
stress,
take
financial
longer,
stress,
but
the
yeah,
neuroimmune system.
exactly.
It's
All these
it's
stressors.
all danger.
Yeah, it all is. Now,
Yep.
the whole thing about cell change response is if in the acute condition, it will shut down the cells essentially to kill whatever's attacking it. But then we have these systems that will restart it. So when you have an acute problem like strep throat, you get strep throat, you feel terrible, your doctor gives you some antibiotics, you start feeling a little bit better. But then there's the day where you turn the corner and get better rapidly. That's when the acute cell danger response resolves. You go back up to that high level mitochondrial function. When it's chronic, which means you have either multiple inputs or the same input multiple times over time, that cellular dysfunction tends to remain. And that includes not, holding on to heavy metals. I mean, the nuances of it are important, but for the concept, you start dropping your immune function because your mitochondrial function overall is dropping. That opens you up to other things, okay? And you start getting progressively sick. Well, then you start expressing differently. You start getting chronic inflammation, and that's where things like autoimmune problems come from. And most of the illnesses, if you look up chronic inflammation, what it does, most of the illnesses we face on a chronic basis are caused by chronic inflammation / oxidative stress, which origin is the cell danger response. And if you know what caused it, you know what's injuring the cells. So if you can take care of what's causing it and heal the cells, you'll take care of all the downstream effects.
So if one listens to this and they're like, "Oh crap, I probably got a lot of work to do." We're going to start out with the simple version of, thinking about terrain theory, thinking about, cellular dysfunction, detoxing that intracellular and even part of the extracellular matrix. What would be some simple action steps that people listening can actually start taking to make a big difference?
Here's what I've found that actually works very well. It's been my experience that the way way your genes work, biochemistry, is you convert things using enzymes, okay, in these pathways. Okay, they take one thing, turn it into another, either so that the body can excrete it or use it. Those enzymes need cofactors, which are vitamins and minerals. Most people, well, we live in a mineral deficient society, and the more processed our foods are, the less you're going to get anything else. So the thing that I have found that makes the biggest difference in most people is the use of a good multivitamin, multimineral. Here's where the problem is. What kind? So generally speaking, look for the word liposomal, Liposomal. Why? Because those are encased in a little fat thingy, okay, that gets directly into the cells. And I have found the biggest changes when I put somebody on liposomal vitamins, which you can get very easily almost anywhere in the world. Just type in liposomal multivitamin, you're going to see it. And it's not as expensive as it used to be because now multiple people are doing it,
Yep.
making it. And I know the scientists actually created the process to turn the liquid liposomal vitamins into a powder that actually works. What's going to happen is it'll get right through the mucous membranes into the cells. What's the difference? Well, when you take a regular multivitamin, okay, it gets into the stomach, then it's got to break down, it's got to get absorbed, go through the liver a couple of times, get released in circulation, then find its way to the cells. A lot of choke points there. Plus, when you take a medication, those companies are forced to do bioavailability studies. So you know when you take that tablet, it's getting in. Supplement companies aren't into the same
Not so much.
all right. So they can make first of all, it's the type of ingredient. So they can say, hey, we have X amount of iron. And they could be scraping rust in there and they wouldn't be lying. That's an extreme example. Okay. But not only the forms of the vitamins, but for tablets, the binders and whatever, to the point that you can't really absorb it even if you have a perfect circulation, perfect gastrointestinal function. Okay. And the forms of the vitamins, women are being told they need calcium, which we do. Okay. But they're being given calcium carbonate. That's the majority of what you take. Well, calcium carbonate, when it hits the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, becomes the bicarbonate ion to neutralize acid, and calcium chloride, which is a rock. It's limestone. So guess what? It creates a nice strong molecule of calcium chloride and it drops out. You're not getting ionic calcium that needs to be absorbed. You're not getting calcium from that. You may get a little bit, of course, but not as much as if you use a different type of calcium. Okay. And this is where it gets a little nutty. If you use liposomal vitamins, you don't have to worry about all that. It's going to get into your cells. So then your biochemistry is going to work a bit better. Okay. And you might start feeling better. Very simple. That's the main thing. And myself, go ahead.
And I think you talked a lot about the vitamins, but just as important is the liposomal minerals. I mean, your body
Absolutely.
is a battery. Talk about the
Exactly.
cells and the mitochondria, its power, its charge, and minerals is the foundation of allowing that charge to actually be expressed and transferred.
Another big consideration of that is minerals are also buffers. Our bodies are supposed to work in a very short range of acid and base, okay, your pH. And we tend to get more on the acidic side. The reason that everybody talks about alkaline, you have to be alkaline, you have to be this, that. The reason that is true is because your entire energy system depends on the pH. So an example of when you break down glucose goes into the thing called the Krebs cycle, and then it goes into the mitochondria. The results of the glucose really don't get into the next cycle if you're acidic. It slows it down really bad. Okay, one of the major reasons your mitochondria doesn't work is it doesn't have what it needs to work. Okay, so minerals tend to be buffers. The biggest difficulty, people, is trying to do this thing piecemeal. Okay, if you try and take sodium bicarbonate, that's not going to give you much going on. Okay, if you're taking a good multivitamin, multimineral liposomal, which I usually, as you said, I usually prescribe extra liposomal minerals. Okay. You're not only going to get your biochemistry working, but you're going to start balancing your pH because anybody who's ill has got a more acidic pH. You know, on live blood cell analysis, you can see it by the clumping of the cells and so forth.
And minerals also act as binders too. So I mean, you're
Absolutely.
getting tons of benefits from minerals.
Yeah,
minerals
are the thing. Definitely.
Those were two amazing, simple recommendations, and they're honestly the two simple recommendations that I always say. That and purified water, whether it's distilled or reverse osmosis, because most of talk about toxicity and everything else is our water is crap and our body's mainly water. But let's get into a little more complex. So,
sure.
What would be some complex advice you'd want to give to the listeners?
I'm known for the words leaky gut syndrome. Okay. I was treating leaky gut before it was leaky gut. What is leaky gut? That's when the barrier between what's inside your gut, which is open to the environment, and your immune system, which is below that barrier, okay, is opened up, okay, for lots of reasons. All the things I talked about in cell danger response are the things that can cause that. When that happens, you start getting increasing inflammation because those antigens that get in interact with your immune system and result in inflammation. And the more it happens, the worse it gets. So my philosophy says treat leaky gut all the time. The argument I get is, well, what testing are you using and so forth? Well, anybody with a chronic illness, I'm just going to go ahead and treat them. Why? Because the treatment for leaky gut, which is giving you some fiber to create mucus layer, maybe some butyrate or glutamine to help the cells, start regenerating themselves, so maybe some zinc to help the cells, bind together, and then considering, a certain probiotic or whatever the person needs. If I treat leaky gut and it is not there with what I just said, am I hurting you? It's very benign, right? If I don't treat leaky gut and it's there, am I hurting you? Absolutely. Because then I'm not taking care of the main reason for that chronic inflammation. Another reason why, even with integrative practitioners, somebody's not healing, if they're not paying attention to that, with all the parameters, recreating the mucus layer, helping the cells reestablish themselves, along with maybe some dietary changes or, considering food allergies, but those are the basic reasons, okay? You're not helping that person, because as that inflammation continues, you're simply not going to get better. Simply not going to get better. So how do you do this? Well, you need prebiotics or fiber. Okay, and there's different kinds of fiber you can use. Acacia fiber, slippery elm. There's a whole mess of them. What do? They when they get into your system, they break down the mucus very quickly, and that's the first layer of defense. There's different substances you can use to help the cells heal. A lot of people use glutamine. Okay, and glutamine, the only thing you have to be careful about there is that if you start taking it and you start getting nervous, it's because glutamine creates glutamate, which is very excitatory. And there's an enzyme that breaks it down to GABA, which is what you do use to calm down. And if that enzyme's not working very well, you're going to get this buildup of glutamate. So you just simply stop. I tend to use butyrate. Butyrate is the result of short-chain fatty acids being metabolized. Okay. Anyway, there's lots of butyrate products, but tributyrin is the best one, because basically what it does is it allows your entire system, it kind of deposits everything throughout the entire GI tract. And if you're looking at probiotics, there's a ton of them out there.
There's a few.
Just look for something that's an lactobacillus and bifidobacteria balance. Okay. And what I have found works well with my patients is a spore based.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be super expensive. If it's the type, it tends to root better. So recreating a mucus layer, giving something for the cells to adhere themselves, also maybe some zinc carnosine to help the junctions get really, really tight, okay? So nothing can get in, and some probiotics. And believe it or not, that simple program starts to correct things, okay? That's the next level of, hey, if we start dropping inflammation, it can only be a good thing. Now your body's not using so much energy to fight the oxidative stress. Okay, I've seen some really interesting examples of this. I was in Poland treating autistic kids, and I had consulted with a family about a month prior to me being there, and of course I was, I saw them while I was there, and I had a translator because I don't speak Polish, and the mother was sitting there shaking, looking at me, and I said, "What's wrong with her?" The translator says she's frightened. I said, "About what?" "Well, she didn't follow your instructions exactly." And I said, "Yeah." "She thinks you're going to yell at her." I'm like, "Okay, what happened?" "Well, I was telling her how to use slippery elm, which is one of those fibers, right? And she misunderstood my instructions. And instead of putting the slippery elm in a cup of warm water, mixing it up, and then feeding it to her son by spoonfuls, she kept increasing it from a teaspoon to a tablespoon to a soup spoon. And I said, "How'd you get him to take it?" Squeezed his organic applesauce in it. And I started looking like this. And then she really started shaking because I'm like this, right? And I said, "Where's the kid?" He comes in and he's like almost normal. Yep. I was like, I said, "Tell her thank you." She said, "What?" I said, "Tell her thank you." They both went tilt. I said, "What you did was, and you just taught me something, and I always learn from my patients, that you did a massive amount of fiber, increased the mucus layer significantly. Those antigens weren't getting in, and his brain inflammation dropped significantly. And now instead of being a whirling dervish, he was a little boy." Did that cure him completely? No, but boy, did I learn something about leaky gut,
Yep.
And
It's
so did
that
she.
gut brain
And I was
axis
like,
is real.
thank you. I'm going to add that in. Yeah. I did a lecture on gut brain axis and its relationship to neurodiversity in Ireland this last September, and learned a lot there too from the other practitioners that the microbiome in the gut is the main thing that signals the brain.
Yep.
And so when you have a normal microbiome, that creates normal brain signaling, normal neurotransmitters, and also down to the hormones. So that's how you establish homeostasis. That when you start getting aberrations in the microbiome from illness and so forth, the signaling, just like a Morse code going back and forth, changes, and then the brain function changes.
Yep. I mean,
I found that fascinating.
95% of serotonin's, initially made in the stomach. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and then there's the whole vagus nerve conversation.
Which is why SSRIs are doomed to fail.
Yeah. No, they're not doomed. They're just failing.
Another subject.
They're not doomed to fail. They are just failing. So
well, yeah, because they
oh, go ahead.
No, they preserve the serotonin in the synapse, but do nothing for the production of serotonin.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a dependency.
That's what the medicines don't do anything for the production of serotonin. Yeah.
So I have two more questions as we're starting to wrap up. The first one was, we talked about a lot of the terrain. We got a little more complex into the terrain. There's a lot of people, chasing what's new on social media, and there's parasite cleanses, and then there's fungus invasions and all these things. And, people might feel a little better for a little bit of time, but as you talked about, foundationally, they're not healed.
Yeah.
One thing that I think most people in the world have forgotten about is that all this is not new. We're treating health and healthcare as it's this new thing, but humans have been around for just a couple of years. And you just released a book that talked about traditional remedies. And I don't think most people know much about traditional remedies. So can you talk about traditional remedies and why they're so powerful?
Sure. Well, like you said, we've been around for a while, okay? And most of our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, so forth and so on, learned things that worked, okay? They learned things that would treat, that didn't involve medications. We have been taught to push those away, and in this generation now, they don't even know about it. But in the transitional generations, like in the 60s and 70s and 50s, advertising and big pharma started saying, don't use this, use that. Take Excedrin for your daily headaches, presuming that daily headaches are normal, but they're not. Okay, now you're seeing the government start putting out things like, don't take this vitamin, it's bad for you this way. And they do a little bit at a time, and you forget that there are other ways of treating things that have been traditionally worked. And if you have the decision-making process of saying, listen, I've got a toothache, it's the middle of the night, Ambisol is not going to do much, but oil of clove will get right in there and start deadening it. But that's not curing it. That's a stopgap measure until you can see the dentist. Okay. If you have mastitis from breastfeeding, believe it or not, there's a cabbage leaf compress you can make that works. It's in the literature. I mean, I found it in the literature, that you can use to decrease the mastitis. When I say naturally is not always good. Okay. But it's an alternative. Okay. Something you can use.
There's usually
no side effects.
There's usually less side effects. So even if you try it and it doesn't get the results, you don't get the other results that you didn't want.
Exactly. My book is called Nana Was Always Right. My grandmother. Nana Was Always Right. It's on Amazon everywhere. Okay. It's on Kindle. Or physical book will come out soon, but it has it exactly like that. I have the remedies. I have the scientific evidence. I went and did the research. Okay. So you could actually go back and say, hey, wow. All right. There's about 35 remedies there, and they're all safe. And again, just read it. And the ebook is very inexpensive. okay, because I wanted it to get out there. I don't want to, jack up the price. And guess what? You might learn something or use it as a reference. And, like the old remedies are excellent. There's been some good stuff out there. Okay. And we base a lot of our medicines on old stuff. Okay.
Well, all
Um,
medicines are, most of medicines are foundationally just different
yeah.
complexes of herbs that's been broken down. You know,
Let me share with your audience that the new and sexy is not necessarily good. Something doesn't have to be complex for you to sit there and say, okay, this is going to work. There's a thing called Occam's razor, which is not a shaving company. It's a philosophical principle that says the simplest explanation is usually the one. Okay. Um, what we are faced with now, especially on Google, by the way, Dr. Google is my nemesis, is a lot of people who are concentrating on the symptoms and saying, okay, you need this detox or that detox. And they don't take care of the terrain. And there's people who just practice that way. So if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Okay. It isn't necessarily so. It isn't necessarily so. Okay. And because it has a complex name or something that takes care of this special thing, doesn't make it right. But remember, it's the beginning of genetics. So everybody looks at MTHFR, that particular gene, and they call it some varied names that I won't repeat here. But they treat it like it's an entity. It's not. It's
no.
one enzyme.
Yeah.
Okay? It's one enzyme. It takes one thing, turns it into another. Okay? I can say the big words, but you won't be impressed. Right? If you don't fix the pathway, if you don't work on the absorption, it's not going to work because all it does is convert one thing to another. In and of itself, that polymorphism, the SNP, or the lack of function of that enzyme, and there's 50 of them, by the way, not two that they usually make, there's 50 of them. Okay. It doesn't mean you're going to be sick, but everybody treats MTHFR like it's a thing. It's not. It's one point of
we've taught to fear a
consideration.
lot of things, which
Yes, we are.
then
That's
goes
the best
back.
way to sell anything.
Fear is one of the biggest things that
Mm-hmm.
controls you, but it also deregulates that neuroimmune system.
Exactly.
So my last question, this is also one of my favorite questions,
Sure.
is I'm going to say a quote, and I would like to hear what it means to you.
Sure.
Come back to what's true.
This is for everything. Something is new, noted. But for anything that you're considering, look at the history of it. Look at the results, or from your friends, from what you've read. Okay, and it's sort of like reading all the various holy books out there. They have two concepts that are all the same. One head towards the divine, essentially, the first commandment. And the second is treat each other nicely. Okay, again, just paraphrasing. They all say that, so that must be a truth. If all the holy books say it, in every tradition, in different ways, but they're saying the same blessed thing, okay, must be truth. So when you're reading, remember that if you go to a website, you're reading testimonials. This person got better in 45 minutes. Well, every practice has got a bell curve, that most people get better in here, but there's always the outliers. That couple of people, like the young lady that I spoke about earlier with the hallucinations. Do I get those results all the time? I wish I could say that. Is she an outlier? Yeah. It was one of the best cases I ever did. I got others like that. Okay, but guess what? If I were going to advertise that, that'd be the one you say, oh, you're going to get those results all the time. No. Okay, just everybody's an individual. Okay, don't go after the sexy. Don't go after the seemingly complex. Look at things in a wider sense. So truth is going to be when you kind of look everywhere, it's kind of saying the same thing. Okay. Not because I said it, not because Guru X said it, Guru Y said it, but looking at the general, looking at the bigger picture, is I think where you're going to find truth.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Dr. Jess. We will put
Thank you.
all of his websites and his book links in the show notes so that you can find him, as well as his remedies and his other books. And I would say to all the listeners, at least start out with liposomal vitamins, liposomal minerals. And if you're intrigued, you can always reach out and get more complex. Thank you again, Dr. Jess, and
Thank you,
have a
Dr.
great
Nick.
day, everybody.
Thank you for being here with us today. Remember, this isn't about telling you what to think. It's about giving you something worth thinking about. If this episode shifted your perspective, share it with someone who needs it because they won't hear this in a waiting room. Subscribe, leave a review, and if you're ready to stop guessing and start transforming, head to integrativeyou.health. We'll see you next time. Stay curious, my black sheep.